Prime Minister Mark Carney is calling the economic relationship between Canada and U.S. a weakness.
Many of our former strengths, based on our close ties to America, have become our weaknesses, weaknesses that we must correct. Canada Strong is our plan to build Canada by Canadians, for Canadians. We're building relationships with other countries. We've signed 20 new deals on 4 continents in less than a year.
The United States under President Donald Trump is acting more like an economic foe than an ally.
Trump told Carney directly, Canada lives because of the United States.
Canada lives because of the United States, remember that.
That was January. 3 months later, Carney won a majority government, sat down on a Sunday morning, and released a video that gave Washington its answer. Canada is done structurally depending on the United States, not as retaliation, as deliberate policy.
The U.S. has fundamentally changed its approach to trade, raising its tariffs to levels last seen during the Great Depression. Many of our former strengths, based on our close ties to America, have become our weaknesses, weaknesses that we must correct.
And the numbers behind that decision expose a vulnerability that 50 years of Ottawa leadership refused to name out loud. To understand what Carney is dismantling, you need to understand what was built. After NAFTA, after CUSMA, after decades of deliberate integration, Canada did not simply trade with America, it wired itself into America. Auto plants in Ontario built to feed US assembly lines. Energy pipelines engineered to run directly into American refineries. Agricultural corridors designed around a single shared border. Ottawa called that fusion a success story. The deeper the integration, the stronger the partnership. That was the governing assumption for 50 years. It was also a trap. Nobody in Ottawa wanted to say that out loud. Not minor friction, not negotiating leverage. Trump raised tariffs to levels not seen since the Great Depression. That framing is Carney's, used deliberately inside the address itself. Auto workers hit immediately. Steel production across Ontario and Quebec began adjusting in real time. Business investment across the private sector froze, not gradually. Suddenly. Companies with expansion plans paused them. Companies with hiring targets shelved them. The uncertainty was not a forecast. It was already showing up in payroll decisions, in factory floor conversations that never reached the evening news. Canada's economy was not in decline. It was holding its breath, waiting to see what Washington would do next. But the real story is not the tariffs. The real story is what the tariffs finally forced Canada to admit. Here is the number that reframes everything. Roughly 75% of Canadian exports flow to one country, one administration, one set of tariff decisions made inside one building in Washington. For an economy the size of Canada's, that is not a trade relationship. That is a single point of failure. On Sunday, he did not soften the diagnosis. He did not call it a challenge. He did not call it a risk or a complication. He called it a weakness.
Have become our weaknesses.
Central bankers do not use that word by accident. Here is what most tariff coverage keeps missing entirely. Canada is not a developing economy asking for access to global markets. Canada holds the world's 3rd largest oil reserves. It produces more potash than any other country on Earth, the mineral that directly underwrites global food production. It controls freshwater reserves that most of the developed world cannot come close to matching. Critical minerals, uranium, lumber, an Arctic coastline that every major power on Earth is quietly repositioning military and economic assets around right now.
It's about taking back control of our security, our borders, and our future.
Canada does not need to find leverage in this negotiation. Canada is the leverage. The problem was never resources. The problem was always roting. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Not for Canada, but for Washington. Carney saw this coming before Sunday. His January address at the World Economic Forum in Davos was built around a single precise argument that economic coercion by large powers against smaller nations produces instability, not compliance. Not eventually, structurally.
Cannot continually monetize their relationships. Allies will diversify to hedge against uncertainty.
The response from Washington arrived within hours. Trump replied publicly, directly.
Canada lives because of the United States, remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
That statement was designed to signal hierarchy, to remind Carney where Canada stood. Instead, it functioned as confirmation. Carney returned from Davos, ran a federal election, secured a majority government, and released a Sunday video that formally repositioned Canada's entire economic direction. The rebuke from Trump did not slow him down. It gave him a mandate. The market had already moved before Carney spoke. Business investment in Canada had been decelerating for months, restrained, in Carney's own framing, by uncertainty hanging over the entire private sector. Auto sector forward orders quietly adjusting. Steel production recalibrating shift by shift. Cross-border supply chains being re-evaluated by procurement teams that could not afford to anchor decade-long infrastructure decisions to a trade relationship that shifted with Washington's mood. The private sector did not wait for a political speech to begin repositioning. It had already started. Carney's Sunday address did not launch the movement. It named it, publicly, officially, without diplomatic cushioning. But here is where the analysis becomes genuinely uncomfortable for Washington. Canada's pivot does not only affect Canada. The United States imports more Canadian energy than from any other single country on Earth. Canadian potash feeds American agricultural production at volumes the US domestic market cannot self-supply. Canadian lumber moves into American residential construction at a scale the domestic industry is structurally not positioned to replace. If Canada successfully redirects 15 to 20% of its US-bound trade toward European and Indo-Pacific corridors, American industries do not simply lose a convenient trading partner. They lose an adjacent, deeply integrated, irreplaceable supplier, one that took 50 years to build. Trump applied tariffs as economic pressure. He may have handed Canada the political permission to leave. This is not a policy announcement built on emotion. This is a structural rewiring, designed by a man who spent his career identifying exactly this category of systemic risk before it becomes irreversible. The US market is too large, too close, too structurally convenient to walk away from. Habits built across 50 years of economic architecture do not dissolve because a prime minister records a video. Carney acknowledged this himself. Hope is not a plan. Nostalgia is not a strategy. But execution is a different category from both. The structural trap is not Trump. The structural trap is the 50 years of economic wiring that existed before Trump arrived and will remain long after he is gone. Canada is moving. The architecture is the question.